Just a quick catch up. So what I've done now is I've covered the plaster shim in rubber and put these clay keys on. Now it's got a complete covering of rubber, which makes it really quite robust now, so that although it's still moving slightly, everything is nicely stuck in position. And it's ready now for the Thixotropic layer of rubber that goes on top. This coat gets rid of all the little air bubbles and all the little problems that you get on a surface like this. So it homogenizes the surface in effect, ready for the Thixotropic coat. You cannot put a Thixotropic coat straight onto a sculpture. It has to be this thin coat first. This gives you really excellent fidelity. I wanted to show you this next stage. So I've mixed up the rubber, which is a Thixotropic mix now, with the Thixo liquid in it, and I'm applying the rubber. I've got a lovely thick coat of rubber on here already, so I can be quite rough. And I'm paddling it in because that paddling motion gets rid of the last of the air bubbles. I vacuumed the rubber anyway. And the key to this is to be systematic. So don't do a bit here, a bit over there. You just work your way up, focusing on what you're doing as you're doing it. Otherwise, you tend to leave areas and you can't see where you've been and where you haven't been. So it's very important to be systematic in the way that you operate. Plenty of rubber on, and then push it around to get a nice even thickness. You want about 5 millimeters of rubber at minimum over the whole piece. And again, it's a rush against time, so you want to be very diligent about what you're doing, but at the same time you haven't got time to mess around being slow. And using both hands is really useful, because it's impossible to get into some areas with one hand when it's facing the wrong way. So I'm just getting it in. And here on the clay keys, you want them to be covered nicely. You don't want them to look like volcanoes. If they look like a volcano, which is sort of that shape where it comes up to a peak like that, they won't work because they won't have any solidity to them. So they need to be a nice blended in rubber area so that they work as poppers. And by working my way up, I'm not hitting my hands on stuff that's been pre-rubbered, if you see what I mean. And that way I keep my hands nice and clean. I never wear gloves for this. I can't damage my own piece now because it's so thickly covered in 3 layers of liquid rubber. That's enough to stop me from damaging it with my metal blade now. So I don't have to be quite so careful. I've mixed up 750 grams. I know that I can easily manage 1,000 a kilo, but I'm starting with less so that I can gauge how quickly the rubber is going to go off. I don't know if you can hear this on the camera, but you can hear little pops like ricicles going off in a bowl of milk, and those little pops are the bubbles popping. So you want to keep going until the rubber is completely silent, which it is now. Here at the edge, you hardly want any rubber at all. The whole idea of this is to make sure that you're not wasting rubber. So you want rubber where it's needed, which is over the keys and on the sculpture itself. You don't want it on the edges of your plaster shim, because an area here, about there, will be cut off anyway. And so the rubber is inevitably wasted. There's about a 10% wastage rate if you're economic. And there's nothing you can do about that as far as I can see at the moment. I'm pushing the rubber ahead of me here so that it pushes into all the detail and pushes the air out at the same time. So again, lots of rubber, and then push it in. So I'm being really methodical and diligent about making sure that I cover everything. I'm thinking about it as I go. You don't want any bald patches because they're quite difficult to see now because the rubber's the same colour. I suppose you could use a different colour to make sure, if you're feeling nervous about it, that you cover everything. This area here I want to fill up completely so that there's no deep areas to fiberglass into. I want everything to be a nice homogenized surface so that it's easy for me to fiberglass over the top. And I want extra rubber around the knees where they're high spots, because they'll be the areas where there's least amount of rubber. And now I've got some warm water with soap in it, and I want to get my hands really slippery. And I'm now pushing the rubber into place. I want to get rid of all the air bubbles. I want it as smooth as possible. It doesn't matter about water getting all over your rubber. It will cure underwater, so the water has no effect whatsoever. I'm just making sure here that I've pushed everything in. And again, like the rest of it, I'm working systematically around it. I'm not jumping from one place to another. You can see the air bubbles popping just here, look. We don't want those in it at all. So I keep going until those air bubbles are popped. It's nice when you can do it with the palm of your hand. There's not many areas you can do that. And I'm pushing the clay around, the rubber around now, to make sure that I've got a nice thick layer. Where the keys are, just rub through so I can see them clearly to cut them out later on. I'm going to work my way around this now and show you what it looks like at the end of this stage. This is the finished rubber stage, the Thixotropic rubber stage. I just wanted to show you this quickly. I've put quadraxial mat over the edges of my splits here, because when the mould is opened up, this area here, if you keep opening and closing it, will tear, and it'll tear right down into the mould, shortening its life. So I'm putting the mat into position, and you can buy this mat from WP Knot Cuts, and it just strengthens these split joints along here. So I'm using a bit of extra Thixotropic just to bind it in. I put it on whilst everything's still wet, and it glues itself instantly into place, which is rather nice. So now when I open and close this mould, whilst I'm making casts, this won't tear. And I've done the same thing here. I'm keeping it away from my keys. You can just see a key just here. I don't want it over the top of my key because it's difficult to cut through. And when I cut the keys out later on, I want it to be nice and easy and nice and neat. So I keep the quadraxial mat away from my keys. So there's my quadraxial mat now, well and truly in my mould. I'm just re-exposing the keys so I know where they are. And after this, there's one more layer of rubber, and that's a thin layer of rubber like we did when we started the mould. And that will just give me a lovely smooth finish to the mould, so it fits in and out of my fiberglass jackets really easily. The better the mould, the better the casts are, and that ultimately saves you time. So rushing a mould and getting a bad mould out, especially if you've got a multiple of casts to make from it, is a big mistake. You want to keep your moulds in very, very good condition, and it saves you lots and lots of time in the long run. And it's all nice and neat. There are no peaks on it. I don't want any peaks on the rubber. I want it to be, everything to be nice and rounded. And that makes that relationship between the rubber and the fiberglass really good. It means that there's no chance of you misaligning the rubber in the jackets. Lovely. And now what I'm doing is cutting out the keys so that the rubber is physically connected to the fiberglass jacket. So when you're moulding and you turn the mould upside down, the rubber stays in your fiberglass jacket. It's a vital part of moulding and casting. It must stay in the jacket. So I thought I'd just show you how it's done. So if you remember, little clay keys were put all over the plasticine that I used to create the seam in the first place. So I'm using a Stanley knife, and I'm just cutting around. And what you want to do is you're cutting in at an oblique angle like this, not straight in like that. And that cuts into the clay. And out pops your rubber like so. And that exposes the key to that you put in the first place, the clay key, that pops out. So if you can imagine now, what happens is when I paint the first coat of resin onto here, that coat will be a Thixotropic coat, and I will use my stirring blade to push the Thixotropic mix into these keys now. And they will form a kind of popper. Because we made them the shape of a roller, if you remember, they'll now form a lovely popper. So you have to pop the rubber into the keys themselves, and that holds it really securely when you're working, making a cast. Remember, you view this as a tool, not as a mould, because it's a tool to recreate the clay that you made in the first place beautifully. So you want beautiful seams on it. No holes, no bits that don't work, no things that are difficult. It should be very straightforward and easy. So by being mindful as you're working all the time, you create these beautiful molds that work and make your job much easier. It makes life feel better. It's about an old-fashioned notion really of craftsmanship, and I think that craftsmanship's absolutely vital. So I'm going to cut out one more so you can see. I don't want to bore you to death just cutting out all of them. There's a lot of them. I think there's over 40 of these keys. So I need to spend some time doing this. But that's the notion. And what you're doing is you're creating a lovely edge to it that doesn't have any feathering on it. So you don't want bits of feathered rubber around. You want it to be a nice shape so that the keys come in and out easily. And I just ease the clay out, and it comes out nice and neatly and cleanly like that, forming the next key. So I'm going to press ahead now and do that.